Hi guys, just want to make a short video showing why you cannot separate the Great Tribulation from the resurrection or from the Last Judgment. And we're actually going to look starting out in Isaiah, then we'll come back. We're going to start in the Old Testament, show how it's going to be fulfilled in Jesus' words, and then we're going to come back and look at the Old Testament again. So Isaiah 26 says this is in a few chapters where it talks about the feast of Abraham, etc., etc. It's talking about Jesus, salvation, righteousness, and it talks about I just want to show you these verses, Isaiah 26, 17 to 19. It says, when a pregnant woman comes near to birth, she is pained. She cries in her pangs. So we have been from thy face, O Jehovah. We have conceived, we have been pained, we have brought forth, as it were, wind, salvation. We do not work in the earth, nor do the inhabitants of the world fall. So salvation, right, they weren't being rescued from these tribulations. Nor do the inhabitants of the world fall. Thy dead live, my dead body they rise, awake and sing. Ye dwellers in the midst, for the dew of herbs is thy dew, and the land of Rephaim thou caused to fall. Come, my people, into the inner chambers, shut thy doors behind thee, hide yourself a moment until the indignation passes over. Right, so you have this sort of judgment language, you have resurrection language, and you have birth pangs of tribulation. So throughout the Old Testament, we see that pattern, right? A city comes to sin against God under the Old Covenant. God sends them prophets that they kill. Then what does God do? He destroys that city, usually through an army or somebody else, or through the Israelites. And quite often he'll save a remnant of righteous people out of that city, and that would be called salvation. And basically this being saved out of calamity is what salvation means. It doesn't mean just go to heaven like some of us think in our Western minds. It says, thy dead live, my dead body they rise, awake and sing, right? So this is a verse you can see in Ezekiel 37 about the dry bones, the valley of dry bones. God will breathe into them. You see, so again, this is a good section of verses to see how you can't separate this tribulation, resurrection, and judgment. Daniel 12. So this is the time of the end. Those who are familiar with the book of Daniel will know this is talking about something Jesus talked about. And Daniel 12, verse 1, it says, at that time stands up Michael, the great head, who is standing up for the sons of thy people. Michael here could be Jesus, or a type and shadow of Jesus. It says, there's been a time of distress, such as not been since there hath been a nation till that time. So this could mean just a unique distress. You see the same language in Ezekiel predicting the destruction in 586 BC, I believe it was, by the Babylonians. Ezekiel 5 verse 9, it talks about it wasn't anything like before or after. It says, at that time do thy people escape, everyone who's found written in the book. So there's an escape, which is salvation. It was written in the book of life, which you can see in the book of Revelation. It says that, and the multitude of those sleeping in the dust of the ground to awake. So you have great tribulation, resurrection, shining as the stars forever, right? And basically Daniel says, hide the things, seal the book till the time of the end. Right, in the book of Revelation he says the time is at hand, time is now. So this was far off in Daniel's day, 590 BC, and then it was at hand in the 1st century. And then it says, if you look at the grammar, it says and. So he's continually talking about the same thing. Talks about this flood, which is Matthew 7:24, is a tribulation again. And he says, who is upon the waters of the flood, which can also be the water of life, spiritually, depending on if you have faith or not. It says, when is the end of these wonders? And I hear the one clothed in linen who is upon the waters of the flood. He's lift up his hand, and he swears by him that after a times and a half, at the completion of the scattering of the power of the holy people, finished are all these. Right? So it's important to understand what he's saying here. He says, finished are all these. Well, he was just talking about this resurrection. He was just talking about this tribulation. And he's talking about the flood. In Daniel 9:26, it says the destruction of the city would come with a flood. So already we know that it could be talking about AD 70, but here it actually says the completion of the scattering of the power of the holy people. Well, the holy people in Daniel's day were the Jews, and the power that they had, right? It couldn't be the gospel, because we know that Jesus said, "My words will never pass away," and the power of the gospel is unto salvation. So it wouldn't be destroyed, because God's not going to destroy salvation. So the power of the holy people was that law that they had. It was basically the power of the law was sin. So this was, and that's in, you can see that in 1 Corinthians 15. And the scattering of the power of the holy people, this would be the destruction of Jerusalem. We see in Hebrews 8:13 that this law was passing, it was disappearing. This would be something Jesus would start on the cross, and it would constantly be, this event would point back to what happened on the cross, and then they would be scattered in the destruction of Jerusalem. So this would be, all of this would be fulfilled, right? Times and half a time. That's, if you read the Greek or you study the notes on these things, that's 3.5 years. It's 1 year, 2 years, and half a year. 3.5 years, which is the exact time of the siege of Jerusalem, talked about in Luke 21. And so we know that, right, verse 1 is tribulation, verse 2 is resurrection. So we can't separate those things. So now let's see where Jesus talks about this in the New Testament. Matthew 23, he's talking about the weeds and the wheat. It's another study, but he quotes actually Daniel chapter 2. And he says, Then shall the righteous shine as the sun in the reign of their Father. Right. So they're going to shine. Right. That was straight out of Daniel, chapter 12. And so this would be when the parable of the weeds and the wheat. And the parable of the weeds and wheat is a judgment parable. So you can't separate judgment then from this resurrection. And the end of the age is spoken of here, which Jesus talked, it says the end of the age in 39. The harvest is the full end of the age. And I have another study that talks about when the harvest is. I'll get into that a little bit more. But we know that the end of the age was in response to the destruction of Jerusalem in Matthew 23 and Matthew 24. So this was the end of the Mosaic age. Right? The Jews and Jesus, they believed in 2 ages. One was the age of the law and of Moses, and that would come to an end. And the other age was of the new covenant, which would never end. Okay. And Matthew 24, he talks about on the housetops, right? Those woe to those with child. Then there shall be a great tribulation. If those days are not shortened, no flesh would have been saved. Flesh is used interchangeably in the New Testament for the law or the lusts of the body. In Romans, he said, if you're in the flesh, you cannot please God. So this isn't usually referring to something physical. Here's the Christ. But the verse I want to show you is about birth pangs. These are the beginning of the sorrows, right? Talking about the full end of the age, right? The fullness of times. This would be the wars. This would be nation rising against nation. Sorrows, maybe that's translated somewhere else differently. Yeah, actually in English Standard Version says birth pains. So it could be sorrows as well, but it could be either one. It doesn't matter. This would be basically the sorrows of resurrection. So there's this fire coming. It would be the last judgment, but if you had faith in Christ, you would go through that fire and you wouldn't get burned. And it would actually bring you salvation, because those who were throwing you into that fire, like in Daniel 3, would be the ones who would be burned. They would reap what they sow. It was a kingdom divided against itself, whereas the kingdom of faith never ends. Right. It can't be destroyed. It's unshakable. And so this would be the birth pains of the resurrection. So I talk about this in my other videos a bit, but I just want to kind of point out how they're connected. But right, he's talking about all these things. And then he talks about the coming of the Son of Man. And then he actually talks about this fig tree. And the fig tree is putting out its leaves. And right, so this would be sort of symbolic of resurrection. So you have this pattern of teaching that says tribulation, right, resurrection, last judgment. All these things will happen at the same time. So you can't separate these things like, frankly, we like to do in a lot of our futurist eschatology. So we can't separate those things. Anyway, that's basically the video for today. I'll just go back to Isaiah one more time, because he does. I just want to show you guys again. It says, like a pregnant woman who rises and cries out in her pains, so we were because of you, O Lord. Right, so this was the great tribulation. This was birth pains. We were pregnant, we writhed, but we gave birth to wind, right? It's like fasting. It's not something easy, but it gives birth to godliness. Right, so we have accomplished no deliverance in the earth. The inhabitants of the world have not fallen. Your dead shall live, their bodies shall rise. You who dwell in the dust, awake and sing for joy, for your dew is a dew of light, and the earth will give birth to the dead. Right, so the dead was like the old covenant exile, and the birth was the righteous shining forth because of the godliness that it produced. They were being refined by these tribulations, actually, because they had built their house upon the rock, which was Christ, and not upon their own works, right? So it was faith on Christ that brought them salvation. Thanks, guys, for watching.